big problems I have when I'm writing virtually anything is format paralysis. That I kind of have an idea for something, but I don't know whether it should be a book, a play, a film, a radio piece, an interpretive dance, an animation, and I end up sort of not writing things because I can't work out what they should be.
Hello, I'm Laura Shavin, and this is the Offcuts drawer, the show that looks inside a writer's bottom drawer to find the bits of work they never finished, had rejected, or couldn't quite find a home for. We bring them to life, hear the stories behind them, and learn how these random pieces of creativity pave the way to subsequent success. This episode, my guest is Dan Maier, whose myriad writing credits span all genres of comedy: television, radio, film, print, stage. Just to pick out a few, he was a core member of the writing team for the entire 11-year run of ITV's BAFTA award-winning series Harry Hill's TV Burp. He collaborated with Charlie Brooker, co-writing the satirical police procedural A Touch of Cloth for Sky and contributing to Brooker's other shows. One of the films he's written on is Sacha Baron Cohen's The Brothers Grimsby. He's created comedy and drama on BBC Radio with 2 series of his own comedy Life on Egg, a comedy drama series co-written with his brother Mark Maier called Trapped, and his own debut radio drama The Not Knowing, which was nominated for a Writers' Guild Award. The list of his credits runs to literally pages and further includes, among other things, books, newspaper articles, the TV soap opera Emmerdale, and even game shows with his own creation Quizness for Channel 4. A very busy man indeed. Dan Maier, welcome to the Offcuts drawer.
Thanks very much. I'm exhausted just listening to that.
So many projects you've been working on, so many formats. What's the most recent bit of writing you've been doing? Or indeed, are you still working on?
I've just written, totally on spec, a horror film,
Oh.
which is something I've never done before. But screenplays I'm quite enjoying at the moment. It's a sort of form that I thought was too big and intimidating to ever attempt. And then I co-wrote a screenplay with the very talented John Niven.
Oh, yes.
And that was really enjoyable. And we've subsequently done something else that kind of started as a telly thing that I've turned into a screenplay, and then I've written another one. Nothing has yet made it as far as the screen, but that's quite an enjoyable process. So that's probably the thing I've been doing the most recently.
Horror, though, I'm looking at your other credits. I don't see any horror. So why the leap?
No, and I'm not particularly a horror fan, so I thought it was quite interesting. You know, I've seen a few horror films, but I'm not steeped in it. So I thought I'm going in there with kind of naivety. If I'm writing kind of very familiar horror tropes and cliche, then I don't know that I'm doing it. So I'm sort of going in quite innocently rather than second guessing myself. So I quite like the idea that I'm sort of trying to write a genre that I only have a superficial knowledge of.
And you're writing this one on your own, are you?
Yeah.
That's very brave if you're writing a project on your own about a subject you're not that clued up about. That's confidence, that is.
Well, it's all stories, Laura, isn't it? It's all stories.
Oh, it's so true. You're so right. Right, well, let's kick off with your first offcut. Can you tell us, please, what it's called, what genre it was written for, and when it was written?
OK, this is a radio sketch that I wrote for a well-known double act in 2013, and it's called Shop Bell.
FX door opens. Shop bell tinkles prominently. Street sounds. Door shuts. Street sounds cut out.
Good morning, sir. Can I help?
Yes, I'd like to buy a shop bell.
I'm sorry?
I want to buy a shop bell. A bell that tinkles when you open the door of a shop.
I'm afraid we don't sell those.
But you've got one on your door.
Nevertheless...
Look, I'm not an idiot.
OK.
No, what I mean is, this isn't a situation like that joke. That joke where a man goes into a pet shop and says, I'd like a fly, and the assistant says, we don't sell them, and the customer says, well, you got one in the window. This isn't like that.
Right.
He's clearly an imbecile. That's the joke. But this is a hardware shop.
It is.
Which specialises in shop fittings.
It does.
So it's reasonable of me to expect you to sell shop bells. I'm not just saying it because a shop bell rang when I opened the door.
I understand.
I mean, if this were a fishmonger's or a nail bar, my argument would be untenable.
Yes.
But it's not. It's a hardware shop.
Which doesn't sell shop bells.
What about the one on the door?
It's not for sale.
I thought it might be some kind of display model.
Well, as we don't stock shop bells, a display model would be at best misleading.
Sell me the bell.
Do you even own a shop?
No.
Then why do you want a shop bell?
I'm an audio engineer. I record radio, comedy and drama. I need a shop bell sound effect to establish that certain scenes and sketches are set in a shop.
It's a bit old hat, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, shops don't really have shop bells anymore. It's one of those slightly archaic radio conventions that no longer accords to real life. I'm not sure anyone under the age of 40 would even understand what the sound signified.
I mainly work for Radio 4.
Oh, fair enough. But in any case, you don't really need a shop bell to establish that a scene is set in a shop.
What do you mean?
Well, let's say that instead of this conversation happening in real life, it was happening in a sketch, set in a hardware shop.
That's difficult to imagine, but I'll try.
Immediately after you came in, I addressed you as Sir, and you explained you wanted to buy a shop bell. It would have been readily apparent to anyone listening that this was a shop. There would be no need for a shop bell.
Then why have you got one?
Because if you remember, this isn't a sketch, it's an actual shop, and I wish to be alerted to the arrival of customers.
But if this is a real shop and not one in a sketch, it undermines the other strand of your argument about shop bells having become archaic. If shop bells only exist as facile scene-setting devices in fictional shops and not in real shops, perhaps this shop is in a sketch after all.
Oh my God.
And can I have a packet of 3/4-inch wood screws and a mortise deadlock, please?
I don't know anymore.
If I hadn't seen the characters' names in the margin, I think I would have guessed who this was written for, because the voices are very clear. But confirm it for the listener, who this was written for.
That was written for Mitchell and Webb. Yeah.
They're very Mitchell and Webby kind of words, I suppose. As soon as I realised that, I thought, of course it is. Of course, it couldn't be anyone else. Did you do a lot of writing for them?
I have done no writing for them whatsoever, funnily enough.
Oh.
I know. This was from, I think this is when they'd been on the radio, been on the telly, and then went back to radio, if I remember rightly. And I'd never written anything for them, and was commissioned to write a few minutes of material, and this was among the things what I wrote for them then, but it didn't run. So, yes, it's a curio in that it's a thing that didn't go, but also for a very talented pair, obviously, that I never have actually otherwise written for. So it's kind of my go at writing in those voices, which was kind of enjoyable.
But you say that they commissioned you to write some stuff. Did you write some other stuff and this is the one that didn't get made, or is this the stuff that you wrote that didn't get made?
I think this is the stuff. So, I mean, I think I was, for those that don't know, the way it works or used to work anyway, in radio and some telly writing, is that you get commissioned by minutes. If it's a sketch show, quite often, rather than somebody saying write 5 sketches, they will say write 5 minutes, or they'll commission you to write 2 minutes for an episode or 10 minutes for a series or something like that. So I think I had like a 5-minute commission. So I think I wrote 2 or 3 sketches, of which this was one. It's interesting. I find that hearing it now, I kind of think the problem I have is I get very attached to things, and I've listened to other people on your podcast, Laura, who sort of hear their old stuff and they've completely forgotten about it and they sort of laugh it off as juvenilia. And part of my problem is I get very attached to stuff and I don't really let anything go, and I still think things that I wrote 25 years ago might have a chance. So in a way I'm more relaxed about this, because this is so specifically written for David and Rob that I sort of feel quite content that it's just sort of, it's not a thing that anybody else is ever going to make. So I feel
I don't know. I mean, I think you could get another sketch team doing it. It's just that David Mitchell's particular delivery style works very well with this script, but I don't think it could only be David Mitchell's delivery style. And obviously Rob Webb doesn't have quite as much character work to do in this bit, but I reckon you might even be able to get women to do it. I'm just saying.
What?
I know, crazy.
Women?
I know, just as a...
Women are allowed to work in shops.
I thought you were saying comedy. Yes. Yes, but all I'm saying is that I thought that this sketch could stand alone, could be performed by any half-decent comedic pairings, frankly.
Thanks very much. I mean, I also like it because it's so absolutely radio, because obviously it's,
Yeah.
It's deconstructing the form and all that kind of stuff that it wouldn't really work anywhere else.
So do you find it restricting or freeing when you're writing in someone else's voice?
That's a good question. I probably haven't done it that much in a way that's quite so pronounced as this. I mean, I enjoyed it here, I found it sort of quite freeing and inspiring that once you have that character, that kind of David Mitchell pedantic character, that was enjoyable to do because he takes his time over every part of an argument. That's quite enjoyable to do as well because you don't have to self-edit quite so much that particular character. You just lay out an argument very sort of clearly and patiently, which is quite enjoyable. In terms of writing in other people's voices, it's a funny one. I suppose the person that I wrote for the longest was Harry Hill, and he has a very distinctive voice. But once you've written for him for a while, you're doing it subconsciously, I suppose. You're not sort of really thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And also, the brilliant thing about Harry is you write a joke in your own voice, in a sense, and he'll take it and make it into his. And I think the best performers will probably do that. If you're talking about writing for writer-performers, you don't necessarily have to write so perfectly in their voices, because I think if they're good and they're on it, they will take something you've done and finesse it so that it is in their own voice. I can't really think of too many instances of writing for a very distinctive voice.
You write for Charlie Brooker, though. He's quite different to Harry Hill. And you wrote, I don't know if they were gags or whatever that you wrote specifically for him, but he was the one performing them.
Well, yeah, for the Wipe shows and the Review of the Year shows that we did, a couple of those on the Wipes, I think it's similar, that you have an idea, but he'll rewrite it in his own voice. I think he's not someone who just sort of sits there and you put a script in front of him, which is the great thing about people like Charlie and Harry, that they're not just sort of mannequins that are just parroting what you say.
Well, otherwise
they're
known as
actually
actors.
helping you by improving what you say.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but they make you look good as a writer because they'll take the best of what you've done and then finesse it and put it in their own voices, which I think is the best kind of people to write for, really.
Right. Okay, well, time for another offcut now. Tell us about this one.
So this is a post written in 2004 for a blog, and the blog is called The Diary of F.W. Cleeve, Gentleman.
My aunt, Mr. Gallion informs me, expressly desired that her carriage be drawn by 4 llama. Gentle reader, I confess a degree of despair. Those of you blessed with both a fair memory and the courtesy to have studied prior entries in this journal will doubtless associate my deceased relative's remarkable post-mortem demand with the time, described by her to me, and thence by me to you, spent amongst the people of the Andes. You may see the employment of the llama in the funeral procession as a touching symbol of the close and kind relationship fomented betwixt my aunt and the pipe-playing, squat-faced children she so colourfully described in her letters. However, scrutiny of her papers in the days following her death revealed how I, and by unfortunate association, gentle reader, you, were led by Aunt Perpetua on a journey of such fictive extravagance I can scarcely bring myself now to relate the truth of the affair. Aunt Perpetua did indeed visit the land of the Incas, but unwillingly. Her steamer capsized en route to Buenos Aires, and she was washed up on a beach in Peru. Bitten by an antler crab, she became delirious in the care of local villagers, with whom she stayed for just 2 days, before a hospital ship, the Ascension, collected her and the other survivors and made for port in the Argentine. Bad weather denied them, however, and the extraordinary decision was made to sail for home. 7 weeks later, the exhausted crew and gravely ill patients arrived in Southampton. Unfortunately, when word spread to the harbour authority that the Ascension bore amongst its cargo a touring Northumbrian cricket 11 all suffering with typhoid, permission to disembark was refused, and the ship was forced to head for Ireland, where such concerns over public health are, of course, less apparent. Still delirious, and now touched by typhus, Aunt Perpetua was committed to the county sanatorium in Cork, where, according to the crumpled practitioner's notes recovered from her papers, she not only developed a complexion of sallow skin and angry pustules, but sank into a deeper and more unpredictable delirium. By turns, the notes record, she believed herself to be a Manchester baker's wife named Joyce Carter, Hans, valet to Archduke Gregory of Westphalia, and a bevel-edged Sheraton mahogany side table. It was presumably as the last of these that Perpetua suffered a twisted knee and bruising to the ribs, as the consequence of an incident involving another patient, a Mr. F.L., who laboured in turn under the unfortunate conception that he was a large vase of chrysanthemums.
It feels like it should be animated. It feels like all the mad activities going on there. I could just see like a little cartoon.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that, but that kind of goes to a problem that I have. I find a thing in writing. It's interesting you should say that, because one of the big problems I have when I'm writing virtually anything is format paralysis. I kind of have an idea for something, but I don't know whether it should be a book, a play, a film, a radio piece, an interpretive dance, an animation, and I end up sort of not writing things because I can't work out what they should be.
Wow.
So it's interesting you should say that, because that's not a form I'd really thought about for that, but yes.
Well, it is a memoir. Yes, I was going to ask you why it was a blog and not a book, because it was a very, very diary of a nobody, very pooter. But is it a blog just because we live in the 21st century?
Well, the time it was written, I think that's kind of one of the things that hopefully is funny about it, in this case, is the medium that I chose to write it in. I, sometime in the early 2000s, sort of discovered the blogging community and started reading a few people's blogs that would just be, as they were, they're just sort of daily journals of different stripes, and saw the way that worked is, you would write a blog, you would leave comments on other people's blogs, and by doing that, they would hopefully read yours, and you build up this sort of network of people who write and read each other's stuff. And I found that quite interesting, and I tried it as myself, I think. I think I wrote a few blog entries, just sort of everyday quotidian bits and pieces, but I didn't have the discipline to stick with it. And at the same time, for some time, I'd been collecting books from secondhand bookshops, books of Victorian and Edwardian thought, generally written by men with too much money and too much time on their hands. There's a sort of strain of these books you'll find of people doing experiments, people having theories, people just writing about whatever they fancied writing about because they sort of wanted their names presumably to go down in history for a thing in the realm of science. But yeah, I just found it a fun way of doing it. And so I wrote, I think, 2 or 3 stories, each broken down into a series of entries. I shall continue in my next entry, kind of thing. And then, being me, I lost the discipline to carry on doing it. But I think at that point I thought, well, maybe this should just be a book. And it is one of those things that I do think about revisiting, because kind of like has something in common with David Mitchell. Again, it's writing in character. I mean, this time for a completely created character, but it's a similar type of enjoyable verbosity where you can write at length, but it's still choosing the language in a nice, specific, enjoyable way. But it's long-winded, it's verbose, but it's, I hope, elegant as well.
Well, I think it is. Okay, well, time for another offcut now. What have we got?
Okay, this is a radio sketch that I wrote in 2010, and it's called 5 Live Trailer.
This is a trailer for 5 Live. I'm saying some things.
And so am I.
There's no real reason for us both to be here. It could just be me.
Or it could just be me.
But this way it sounds like more effort's gone into making the thing
than if it was all one person saying all the words.
We usually make it sound like I'm in the room.
And I'm in the room as well.
But sometimes we make it sound like I'm in the room.
And I'm on the phone.
And then other times,
like I'm in the room.
And I'm on the phone.
But we never make it sound like we're both on the phone.
Because that would mean
there'd be no one in the room.
Then who would feed the cat?
Often the things I start to say
are finished by me.
Sometimes he finishes them in the room.
And sometimes on the phone.
But occasionally, instead of finishing each other's sentences,
we just repeat what the other person said.
Repeat what the other person said.
The person in the room says the thing.
Says the thing.
And the person on the phone repeats it.
Repeats it.
Until they start to sound like an annoying child.
Child.
We might jazz things up with a clip of commentary from the motor racing.
Or the horse racing.
Or the people racing.
But it doesn't really help.
Perhaps they'll use some of the money they save on 6 Music
to make 5 Live trailers sound a bit less tossed off.
Tossed off.
But probably not.
Probably not.
Shh.
You shush.
So your original description of this, when I asked you about what genre it was written for, you said it was written for your own amusement with you as a performer. What were you hoping to do with it eventually?
I put it on YouTube or something, probably. It's just an observation about 5 Live trailers, really. I started noticing that these tropes about the trailers on 5 Live, and I just ended up writing this. I never really had it in mind that it would be on a radio sketch or anything. I really just did it to please myself and thought it would be good if I could record it, but I didn't really have the technical wherewithal. But I think you can feel the sort of rage when I hear it back. I can sort of hear that sort of fury
At the frustration of having to listen to that kind of writing.
I mean, not really. It's just that sort of those tropes. Once you notice them, you can't unnotice them. That's what 5 Live do. That they'll have a bit like this, and then they'll have a bit like this, and that they haven't really changed. I think what struck me about it is I spent 5 years writing radio commercials in the 1990s. That was my one proper job. And that was really good training. As I always say, that's really good, sort of like boot camp for writing radio sketches, because you are having to write something in 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and you have to sell something at the end of it, and you've got to be really focused, and there's no time for indulgence. I was lucky enough to work for a company that wanted to make radio advertising more creative, basically. So it was a good opportunity to do creative work.
So radio is kind of your springboard into comedy, is it? Before getting your job in radio, were you kind of always a bit of a comedy geek, a comedy fan, growing up through school and all that sort of thing? Or did it just happen because you had to be witty and grab people's attention within the radio ad sort of spectrum?
I was never a comedy geek, I would say. I'm not one of those people that has an encyclopedic knowledge of every episode of Eastbound and Down, or knows who the grip was on Steptoe and Son and things like that. I'm not that guy, but yes, I was enjoyed comedy, and I was like writing comedy since I was at school. Me and my friend Nick Brownlee used to write sketches in the sixth form common room, which if I could find, if they were digitally, it's on a digital form, I would have sent you some of those, Laura, but I don't know where. They're in a lockup somewhere in a notebook from the 1980s.
Did you perform them, or did you just write them for?
No, I just sort of wrote them for our own amusement, I think. And then after I left university, I got the opportunity to write radio ads, which was a great way. I knew I wanted to write professionally, and this was a really good opportunity to do so that a lot of people probably wouldn't think of or wouldn't get. And as I say, I was lucky enough to be writing for a company that wanted their ads to be fun and creative, and to use kind of celebrity voices on some of them rather than the sort of circuit voiceovers, and so that was nice. That's a opportunity to work with actors and comedians and things like that.
But then how did you pivot from writing for straight ads to actually actively being a comedy writer? What was the connection?
Well, I did that for 5 years, as I say, and because we were sort of good at it and we won a lot of awards, we started writing some ads for, this is slightly confusing, for the Radio Advertising Bureau. So there's a body called the Radio Advertising Bureau, which was kind of the body that promoted radio as an advertising medium to businesses, and they themselves, as a way of promoting radio for advertising, had monthly awards. So I wrote the ads that announced the results of the Radio Advertising Bureau Best Ads of the Month, and we had Johnny Vaughan voicing them.
Right, yeah.
And this was in 1997, I think. And it was just before he started working on The Big Breakfast. And he liked the stuff that I was writing, and I'd come down to London. I was still working in Bradford then. I'd come down to London once a month and do a recording session with him. And he seemed to sort of like my sense of humour. So when he got a job on The Big Breakfast, they'd never used comedy writers before. It had always been producer written before Johnny and Denise started doing it. But then they decided to use writers, and he recommended me to have a trial writing on The Big Breakfast, which I did, and then that sort of became a longer term thing, and from there I wrote on other stuff. So I have Johnny Vaughan to thank for my entry into the world of comedy writing, which was quite the baptism of fire, from going from writing radio ads to getting up at sort of 2 a.m, be it standing in a cold porter cabin in Bow at 5:15, going through the day's newspapers, having to write a 15-minute newspaper review that was going to be broadcast 3 hours later. That was quite a pressure first. It's quite good to have that as your first job in comedy writing, I think, because after that, most of the other stuff seemed like a breeze.
Yeah. moving on now, let's have your next offcut.
So this is a theatre piece that I wrote in 2009, and it's called The Plagiarist.
Channel 5 are looking for a precinct drama, says Harriet, typing. Ian Emerald leans against Harriet's window, forehead pressed to the glass, and gazes at the street below. What the fuck, he asks, is a precinct drama? For a few moments he thinks the tapping of keys is to be her only answer. It's a drama, Harriet eventually replies, set in, don't say a precinct. It's something like The Bill or Casualty, something with a central location that can generate, storylines infinitely. Good Christ. Well, says Harriet, finishing the email to one of her more successful clients, confirming the format rights she'd negotiated for him on a new hidden camera TV show, give me something to flog and I'll take it to whoever you like. Ian leans back from the window, leaving a small greasy arc unnoticed on the glass. TV is dead, he informs his agent. Then write a play. Ian sits down opposite Harriet, taking a script from her desk. Fuck that. He looks at the title sheet. Hot Wash by Mark Littenhurst. Let me guess, is it a sitcom set in a laundrette by any chance? Harriet says nothing and Ian turns the page. Scene 1, interior laundrette. Fucking bullseye. Who's Mark Littenhurst? It was sent in on spec, she says. He's looking for representation. Good luck with that, says Ian, dropping the script on Harriet's desk and sending a pencil rolling over the edge. At least, says Harriet, showing no interest in recovering the pencil, he's fucking written something. Back in his flat, Ian waits for the kettle to boil and stares blankly into his small courtyard garden in which things grow equally unfettered and unencouraged. He's written nothing today. The meeting with his agent, while essentially redundant, nevertheless constitutes work, and so he could now go and watch a DVD unencumbered by guilt. Taking his mug of tea into the living room, though, Ian reflects that he wrote nothing yesterday either, or the day before. In fact, as he sits down and absently manipulates the legs of the Incredible Hulk action figure recently given to him by his friend Jerry as an ironic 40th birthday gift, and perches it on the handle of the hot mug, he tallies his professional achievements of the last 3 months. They amount to 2 days' work on a doomed game show pilot, 4 quite generic sketches with no specific recipient in mind, and the bullet points for an idea, for an outline, for a treatment, for a sitcom. On the floor, a pile of the previous weekend's newspapers appears to be connected by a cable to a wall socket. Ian removes the papers, revealing his Sony Vaio underneath. He opens the laptop, which has optimistically been left on standby for 5 days, and logs onto the internet. Too many distractions at home. Ian needs a change of scene. He Googles Lake District Hotel B&B and persuades himself that as a means to an end, this too constitutes work. In fact, all in all, it was turning out to be quite a productive day.
Well, this, I'm guessing it is very true to life?
Just hearing it back now is so exposing. I didn't realise quite how autobiographical it was until I heard it back. I would say, though, I have never owned a Sony Vaio, so it's not.
Oh, well, yes,
me.
in that case, you're completely cleared.
But no, I'm God Almighty. I mean, that's. Yes, I mean, obviously there is a
It's a fantastic little microcosm of everything. If you want to be a writer, listen to this. This will tell you everything you need to know about the life of a writer. Well, a writer for hire.
Yeah.
You've just summed up the entire existence. But I'm guessing this is true, not having been a writer for hire, but it sounds like it is absolutely true. Is it?
There is a lot about that experience that is very true to life, I think, yes. I've obviously tried to make the character a bit more monstrous than I would be, to hide myself somewhere. I think you would always do that if you put anything autobiographical in any character. I think instinct is to exaggerate so that, what is actually true to you is.
I loved the bitterness, though. The bitterness, this conversation with his agent and the sort of almost snarling through gritted teeth about other people and
I hope that's the exaggeration bit as far as I'm concerned. I don't think I would be that much of a prick. But obviously there's that sort of internal voice, which is fury and impotence.
I didn't think he sounded like a prick. I think he sounded completely believable. There's voiceover variations of that and actor variations of that. I just heard that and went, yeah, That would be me if I was a writer, completely. But it was written as a theatre piece.
Yes, I know. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Because you just listen to that and think, well, this is obviously a book. Yeah, I did write it as a theatre piece. I think I was inspired by sort of long-form storytelling pieces, sort of things that Ben Moore would do, and those kinds of really great, gripping things where there's just one person on stage. But I thought, well, the idea here was that it would be that kind of thing, but there would be two narrators, and the two narrators are telling different stories, and we cut back and forth between the two stories, and then the two stories seem completely unrelated, but they then collide.
Yeah.
And that was the form of the thing. And then as it goes on, it becomes a lot more deconstructed and meta as one of the narrators kind of breaks away from part of the story that he's telling and kind of says, hang on, this doesn't make sense, points out sort of narrative inconsistencies in the story, and the whole thing kind of breaks down.
Ooh, very Brechtian.
In a very indulgent, meta, deconstructed way. So that was kind of the idea. And what I was talking earlier about format paralysis is probably a good example. That I wrote this for theatre, but I think I read the whole thing back, it was about 2.25 hours. So it would be about 2.25 hours of two people on stage reading out what is basically a short story.
Well, that's a play.
It is, but when it's basically nothing to look at.
That's true.
I think I asked the very lovely Jeremy Dyson of the League of Gentlemen. He read it and he said, You're kidding yourself, you've written a short story here. There's no point pretending that you haven't written prose, because that's basically what it is. And that's probably true. But again, it's that thing of, well, what do you do with it?
Or turn it into a book of short stories, or a longer story.
It could be a novella, I suppose. Maybe I revisit it and do that with it. But I quite like the deconstruction element of it. And that, I did think, again, could it work actually on the radio? It might be a fun way of playing with the form again. It is kind of, it gets quite silly as it goes on, just in terms of the structure.
Right.
In that these two narrators start arguing amongst themselves or discussing and taking apart the narrative and pointing out the flaws in it. And then I, as a character, as the writer, Dan Maier, sort of come out of this audience of the theatre and go on stage and start remonstrating with them for ruining the performance. And say, why just stick to just read the stuff out that's on the page. And then, of course, one of them rightly says to me, yes, but you wrote this as well. You wrote you interrupting this performance. Why are you pretending that this isn't part of it? Do you really think this audience think they've all come on the one night where everything broke down and the writer came out of the audience? And I will, and it sort of disappears up its own arse slightly then, where I'm sort of saying, don't point that out to them. Why are you constantly lifting the curtain so that they can see behind it?
Yeah.
And the guy says, but you wrote that as well. You had me say that because it's, and it sort of becomes this a bit daft. And one of them spoils the ending of the play, and I have a go at them for doing that. But I kind of enjoyed it. So yes, it's a thing that, in that sense, would be harder to make work actually on the page. Because of the deconstruction, unless it turns into some sort of B.S. Johnson deconstructed short story. I think stage or possibly radio might be an interesting way of doing it. Yeah, it's a peculiar thing because, as I say, there are prose touches in there. It's written as prose, and I think written quite well as prose, but it then falls apart in a way which is not conducive.
Which is
prose.
theatrical, yes.
So the narrative stuff is probably more laborious on stage or on radio. So it weirdly sort of, it's like some weird hybrid beast.
Well, it feels like you've got two projects in there and you just separate them. The detail of the writer's life and the other characters could be a book, but you'd have to obviously truncate it into a play because, like you say, it would take too long to explain it all. But then the theatrical convention and the fourth wall breaking and all that stuff is very... you can break the fourth wall. I don't know what you call it in radio, the fourth glass booth, I don't know, but you can break that in radio play.
Sure, yeah. But then, yes, as I say, the narrative bit of it is the tricky bit.
Yes, there's so much there. I can see why you've got the issue of, gosh, where do you start?
Yes,
which bits
do
you
go in any box, which is why the box it goes in is a file on my computer where it sits and gathers dust.
Right, well, let's move on to your next offcut now. This one is what?
So this is from a children's book called 30 Planets, One Barbecue, which I wrote around 2020.
Can you hear that? Asked Luca Pie. Lila couldn't hear that, whatever that was. She could only hear the angry voice in her chest trying to get out. The voice that spoke when she felt upset and started telling someone why, but only inside, not out loud, which felt sore. They'd flown for 9 hours, the voice was saying, adding some basic swears because, being inside, it could get away with it. 9 hours! And for what? Still, Lila thought, better to feel angry than utterly terrified. She didn't think that then, though. She thought it a few minutes later, once she'd actually been utterly terrified and could more easily make the comparison. No, if you'd asked Lila Pye then, standing in damp and total darkness, she would have told you her immediate plans involved stomping around after her dad, mainly looking at the muddy ground, with some tutting, possibly a bit of eye-rolling, and definitely being unimpressed with anything he tried to show or tell her. She was kind of looking forward to it. And with all that, there was simply no room for feelings like utter terror. But now that her dad had asked her about the that she couldn't hear, well, now that that her dad had asked her if she could hear was louder, she could hear that. Distant thunder, but not coming from the sky, coming from the ground. And it was getting closer, louder and louder. And then it stopped sounding like thunder. Oh, crud, said Luca. No, not thunder. Feet. 400 muddy feet. "We're in the middle of the Hognall course!" Lila shouted, but could hardly hear herself over the sound of galloping. Suddenly she felt herself being pulled. Luca had her arm and was running towards a row of lights. "Run!" he shouted, letting go again. "Lila, run!" And now, very suddenly, their lives were in danger, and utter terror had very much jumped to the top of her things to feel list. But look, you're probably thinking it would help if you knew what a Hognall was, or where Lila and Luca were, or who Lila and Luca were, or who ampersand I, ampersand A and ampersand Uca were, because you've somehow got hold of a glitchy e-reader version, or who Genki is, because you're the kind of total toolbox that has to flick to the end of a book before they start reading. So stop doing that, and let's go back a day.
So this is from the children's book. How much of it did you actually write?
All of it.
Oh.
I wrote an entire thing, maybe during lockdown, pre-lockdown. It was lockdown-y kind of time, I think. I had this idea, and again, the running theme is things going through different versions. I mean, all of them were a book in this case, but different kinds of a book. Mm-hmm. I'd had the idea of writing an encyclopedia of planets, a big thick book, and every page there would be an illustration of a planet on it, and on the facing page there would be a description of that planet. So they would all be made-up planets, but there would be perhaps sort of 300 of them or something, and they would each have different qualities to them. And it kind of goes back to, I think it's a thing that I always enjoyed as a kid, and I assume kids still do, which is different iterations of a single idea are quite exciting. And what I mean is, I suppose the first example I can sort of think of from childhood would be like the Mr. Men. Mm-hmm. So you read Mr. Bump and you understand the world and you understand the idea. And then you see there's another thing called Mr. Tickle, and you go, oh, I see, that's exciting. And then you see, all right, each one of these things is going to open with a description of their house, and this is what he looks like. And once you've established that as a thing, it seems like an obvious thing to say, but I think there's something really exciting, particularly as a kid, about what's the next one going to be, what's the next one going to be, what's the next thing that fits into these parameters in this world that I understand. Yeah. And I think there is an instinct for that, which is somehow really exciting, which I wanted to kind of revive in a way. Except in this sense, it would be a bit different because it's all in one book, that you would turn a page and see another planet, and you could find your favourite planet, and you could have this book for years and maybe find a page in it that you'd never noticed before because you dip in and out of it. And there was something sort of exciting about that. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of liked that idea. So initially it was going to be that and a very heavily illustrated book. But then I had the idea of actually having a narrative running through it. So I had this idea for this story, and I had the story on one side and the sort of list of planets on the other. And I cut down the list of planets and then managed to weave the story through the list of planets. So it's become a story about this girl, Lila Pye, and her dad, Luca, going on a quest which takes in all these different planets. So it's very episodic, travelogue-y in a way. And there is an overarching idea to it. But you can also sort of dip in if there's a particular planet, and all these different planets have different qualities to them and a different vibe to them, and some of them help them in their mission and some of them are kind of detours. And so I just started writing, and then by the time I'd finished, I'd written 92,000 words. Wow. And my friend, the very talented children's author, Nadia Shireen, said, yeah, you can't have a 92,000 word book for middle grade readers. Yeah. And she said, why don't you make it into a trilogy? So, well, that's quite a good idea. So I basically then broke it down and put some sort of connective material between the bits. And so entirely on spec, nobody having asked me to do it, I've written a trilogy of children's books.
And have you submitted it to anyone?
Yes, I have yet to find a literary agent who will take it on. That's where it's at. But yes, it's very much a thing that I haven't written off that I would really like to do something with. Weirdly, it's another thing that would work as an animation. Probably as like an animated series, but that's not a world I know a huge amount about.
So this is just a sort of one-off project on its own. You're not changing direction now slightly that way. Well, mind you, you're now doing horror film as against a children's book. So this is yet another branch of your tree, so to speak.
Yes, I like to try and be a jack of all trades. A dilettante, trying to muscle into other people's territory.
Why not? Everyone else does.
Why not? No, I didn't necessarily see a future as a children's author, although it's a thing I would love to do if I had an idea that was good enough. But this was just a one idea. I think these characters could come back. But yeah, this idea just sort of took on a life of its own slightly. And yeah, I really like it. And I think there are a lot of, because of the nature of it, you're hopping from planet to planet and each planet has its own characteristics. There are a lot of ideas packed into these books and sort of fun visual ideas with all the different qualities that these planets have. And I think, yeah, it would be great to do something with it.
You probably just need to speak to someone who knows about the clear demarcations between the various children's genres, you know, whether it would work for an animation or even a play, maybe. A sort of theatre play with some imaginative staging.
Maybe. Sure, yeah. No, it seems very inventive children's theatre, but that's interesting, yeah.
You just got all these different type of formats.
I know, you're making it worse.
Sorry about that, yes. Ignore anything I have to say. Right, we've come to your final offcut. Tell us about this one, please.
This is an episode from a proposed comedy anthology series. The series was going to be called The Function Room, and this episode was called Lookalikes, and I wrote it in 2008.
Exterior, a night sky. We hear a man's voice off camera.
We are professionals, artisans, craftsmen and women.
Pan down to the exterior of an average pub on the high street of an average English town. We pan past the pub sign, The Rifleman, and across to an upstairs window, over which we hear...
And we're being treated like cattle. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you to look inside yourselves and find the strength.
Interior, the function room. As the man speaks, we pan past the optics behind the bar and reach Sandy, the prematurely ageing and balding 30-something barman. Sandy stands agog, apparently transfixed by the speech.
To find the courage to stand up and demand the respect your talent deserves.
We pan down past the glass Sandy is absent-mindedly drying, past the bar front to the floor, then across to a pair of gaudy woman's shoes, over which the voice continues.
We've been lied to, cheated, kept in the dark.
Over the next, we pan up over a camp, over-the-top bejewelled costume complete with feather boa.
Keith West thinks he can get away with it. Well, not anymore. What makes him think he can treat us like idiots?
We come to rest on the speaker's face. He is dressed and made up as Dame Edna Everage.
It's time for each of us to say, hey, enough! I'm tired of being undervalued, bottom at food chain. I'm an artist, and I've got my dignity.
For the first time, we see Dame Edna's audience from his point of view. Seated in rows are around 50 men and women. They are all dressed as famous people. The front row includes Elton John, W.G. Grace, and Hitler. Behind them, we can see the likes of Victoria Beckham, Andy Warhol, Churchill, and the Blues Brothers. Tableau. After 5 seconds silence, there is a rhythmic clanking, buzzing sound. Cut to behind the bar where the glass washing machine has started up and broken the silence. Cut to Sandy, expression as before.
Yes?
We see an arm has gone up in the audience. It belongs to a Crocodile Dundee lookalike.
What do you mean, cheated?
Oh, how long have you been with the agency, chum?
4 months. Joined from Faces Inc. when they got shut down.
Well, if you've been with Keith for 4 months, he's probably been ripping you off for 3. Usually gives a month's grace.
A Princess Diana lookalike in the row in front of Crocodile Dundee turns to speak to him.
Shut down, is it? Faces Inc?
Yeah.
He charges 15% for starters. What did Faces charge?
10.
Near the back sits a small man in his early 60s, Yasser Arafat.
No wonder they shut down.
No, we're in for a station.
I was quite pally with Mel.
Oh, yeah, nice girl.
10%. Bookalikes charge 12. Jackie Anderson charges 12. Ian, you were with Lasting Impressions, weren't you?
We see a Winston Churchill lookalike trying to light a cigarette lighter.
Yeah.
What was their commission?
10s.
Posh Spice sits behind Crocodile Dundee.
Infested with what?
10% again.
Big deal. He's upfront about it. You know how much he takes when you sign on.
White ants.
But then he charges a signing on fee.
I was very worried about this piece that we couldn't do it justice as an audio piece because obviously a lot of the comedy depends on the difference between the way a character looks, who they're dressed as, and whether they're even a believable lookalike and how they sound. But
It's quite visual, isn't it?
It is a particularly visual piece.
I was there. I thought you definitely did it justice.
Oh. Now, you said this was part of a series called The Function Room.
Yeah.
I know you wrote that. Was that not made into a series then?
No, there was a pilot that was broadcast.
Mm-hmm. Not this episode, presumably, not the lookalikes.
Not this episode. So it was, I think it might have been a comedy lab, Channel 4 Comedy Lab. I think it was part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd had the idea of, I noticed there were sort of drama anthology things that were set around a particular place, or those sort of Jimmy McGovern things. Was Clocking Off, is that one of those?
Yes, that's one.
Or The Street or whatever.
Yep.
Where you would have different stories that had some linking theme, but they were all individual stories.
Yeah.
And I noticed that no one had done that in comedy, really. It didn't seem to be a thing in comedy. And it felt like a good opportunity to do single half-hour things that had some sort of thematic link.
Yeah.
So I had this idea of the thematic link being the function room, being the room above a pub, and every week a different group of people would hire that function room for whatever purpose. And that felt like a good, fun conceit.
Yep.
And also I thought you could then have some recurring characters. So Sandy the barman appears every week.
Yeah.
And also in the pilot we cut away to a couple of barflies at the bar downstairs who are just sort of having bar chat that has no relation to what's going on upstairs as a sort of light relief. I thought they could be a running thing.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this episode, another episode, which was about a neighbourhood watch meeting where they all meet up to discuss the fact that someone has been throwing compacted balls of human faeces through people's windows. And that was commissioned and that was made as a pilot. And the cast was fantastic. It was like the late Paul Ritter was in it. He was great. Rhys Shearsmith, Simon Day playing one of the barflies downstairs, and Kevin Eldon. It's incredible. They were really great. And it didn't get commissioned as a series. Annoyingly, the sort of regret I have about it is we filmed it in front of an audience.
Oh.
Because they really wanted a studio audience thing, and actually I don't think it was at its best as a studio sitcom.
Yeah.
I think it was should have been a non-audience thing. But, you know, I got to make a comedy programme at BBC TV Centre with an audience coming in and laughing at jokes. So that was sort of one of the most incredible experiences of my professional life. That was very exciting to be able to do that. And then it just, I had absolutely no recollection that I'd written a second episode. Obviously, as part of the process, I knew I'd sort of sketched out some more episodes, but actually, until we did this, I had no recollection that I'd written another one, obviously, about these people from this lookalike agency meeting up. So, I mean, the thing that was at the back of my mind that I should say is if there are any Inside Number 9 fans listening who are shouting at their broadcast devices, but that's just Inside Number 9 did that. This was 6 years before Inside Number 9, so I hadn't ripped off the idea of linked comedy one-off half-hour things.
Yeah.
At that time, really, I don't remember anybody doing it.
The thing about Inside Number 9, apart from it is comedy, but it's supposed to be horror, and it is very much built around the two of them. So it's a very, very specific series, whereas this is much more general. It doesn't seem to have any specific rules apart from the fact that it's set in that particular venue.
Yeah.
So I don't see how it would clash, especially now that Number 9 is no longer. So it could, but even if the BBC or whoever don't have the budget for this sort of thing at the moment, again, radio, maybe not the lookalikes thing because it is quite visual, but as a series.
Yeah, there's definitely ways of doing that, I think, as on the wireless. I mean, that is, I kind of did something similar, which you mentioned at the start with my brother. We did write a sort of linked anthology comedy thing called Trapped, where that was the conceit, is every episode is somebody trapped in a situation, either physical or emotional. So yeah, I've done something similar thematically in that sense, or structurally,
right,
in the past on radio, and it was quite good fun. It's generating the ideas is obviously the difficult bit. When you've got a sitcom, when you've got your characters and you've got all your stuff, I suppose you've got some stuff pre-printed on the page, in a sense.
Yeah.
It's harder when you're starting from scratch each time, which again is a sort of incredible thing about how they managed to maintain that quality on Inside Number 9.
Yes.
When they're starting with a blank page every time. But yeah, I had some other ideas for this, but...
the lookalikes thing was, I'd love to have seen that. I'd love to actually visually see these characters in their costumes, the comedy. The script was very funny, but to actually have that in context with, the people dressed up as your Dame Edna Everett, Hitler. Hitler sitting... There's been a lot of call for Hitler lookalikes.
Hitler, never not funny.
Well, we've come to the end of the show. How was it for you?
Fun. It's good. It was fun.
With the reservations some of this stuff there.
It's kind of, like I say, I kind of don't let stuff go very easily. So I can't be sort of, pretend to be sort of embarrassed by my juvenilia or something. I still like this stuff,
Yeah. There was nothing in there to sort of go, ha ha ha, weren't you a rubbish writer in those days?
Oh,
but now...
you're terribly kind. You're terribly kind.
No, but it's true. Well, those are the pieces you chose to give us. So
yeah. Well, I suppose it was quite self-selecting in that sense. I left out the worst stuff. The things like the F.W. Cleave, the Victorian diary, I kind of enjoy listening to that, and that's a thing where I think, well, I could maybe it's something to revisit. And yeah, hearing the stuff that just exists, is of its time, is kind of interesting as well. So yeah, no, it's very enjoyable. Felt very indulgent, but doesn't feel like it's my indulgence, so it's fine. So I thank you for that.
From listening to that stuff, is there any advice you'd give a younger you, knowing what you now know? The answer could be no, by the way. You're allowed to say not really, no.
I think write more and actually try and do something with it, because I think the fear of the sort of lack of confidence in things meant that a lot of stuff was written, then I felt I'd scratched an itch and it would go into a drawer. And I think with a lot of this stuff, I didn't make enough effort to actually pitch stuff. I'm not one of nature's pitchers. I'm very much under promise and over deliver, whereas I think as a writer, probably just commercially, the reality is you sell your ideas and then you worry about actually trying to write them. And I would tend to be the opposite of that. That I think I'm better at that now, but certainly at the time I wrote most of this stuff, I would just think, well, I'm going to write this thing just to see if I can write it.
Yeah.
And then having done that, I would probably lose confidence in it and, as I say, put it in a drawer. Whereas actually being committed to writing something and then being obliged to write it and obliged to show it to them is probably a healthier way forward, even though it's a bit more exposing and a bit more scary than this little solipsistic writer's garret that I probably inhabited during most of the early noughties, from when most of this stuff comes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, your offcuts have been very entertaining, and it's been fascinating talking to you. Dan Maier, thank you for sharing the contents of your offcut straw with us.
Thank you very much.
The Offcut Straw was devised and presented by me, Laura Shavin, with special thanks to this week's guest, Dan Maier. The Offcuts were performed by Emma Clarke, Chris Pavlo, Jake Yapp, Nigel Pilkington and Helen Goldwyn, and the music was by me. For more details about this episode, visit offcutstraw.com, and please do subscribe, rate and review us. Thanks for listening.